Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a warm welcome to the Voice of the Cape Matric online revision program. Today we are covering the subject of English with the facilitator Muslimah Ismail Allie, and yes, she is she's currently based in Cairo, Egypt, and this is the second lesson in our series of online revision programs. And the topic, or rather the topic for today, I'm going to leave that to Muslima. But before we hand over to Muslima, just to give you a brief overview and intro into who she is, Muslima Ismail Ali is a language tutor with 8 years experience with a BA in Arabic and Islamic study. She's also an educator in Islamic studies and a public speaker, being formerly one of my colleagues here at the Voice of the Cape, presenting and producing as well. And she's obviously got that media experience in terms of presentation. And currently, she's completing her studies in classical Arabic at Markaz Fajr for non-Arabic speakers in Cairo, Egypt. Assalamu alaikum, Muslima. Welcome back.
Walaikum salam. It is definitely a pleasure to be back with you once again, Juanita.
Alhamdulillah. And yes, just before we get into the lesson, Muslima, I want to also just remind the viewers to check the drop down section below, or rather the running credits below, and to note that the Voice of the Cape's online matric revision program for this year is proudly sponsored by the Two Oceans Graduate Institute. They are an accredited online platform where you can become a primary or a high school teacher, and you can do so in the privacy of your home. In the comfort of your home as well. And you can visit www.togi.ac.za or call 021 829 7015. So, yes, Muslima, I think, you're obviously having the background in teaching. I'm sure that it is quite a rewarding experience for you, but also noting that the viewers who are our grade 12 learners or students will have access to these lessons. So give us an overview of what it is that you'll be covering in today's session.
So, shukran once again for allowing me to do this year as well. We will be covering literature today. In the prior lesson, we went over language skills and also writing tips as well as skills, and that is a combination of paper one and paper three elements into one. And as I mentioned before, with a language in general, it requires lots and lots of practice. So we can go over things and we can give you tips and we can give you notes, but majority, which I would usually say 70 to 80% of the work actually comes from the student. So we are just there as a guide or as an assistance in order for you to excel, but the excellence will have to, of course, come from the student.
Perfect. Yes, so Muslima, without any further ado, I now hand over to you to proceed with the lesson.
Okay, so shukran to you, Conita, and we'll be starting right away. So, as I mentioned, we are focusing today on English literature, and this encompasses the elements that are covered in paper two of English home language as well as first additional language. I do know that there are some students that do first additional languages and second additional languages. However, English would be very similar with regards to the levels and the content that is covered. Primarily you will have to cover the same sort of aspects within your papers. Sometimes it will be on a higher grade level, which would be home language, since that is the language you are most exposed to. You are expected to go much more into detail in that, whether it is at home or just at school, and that's also your medium of learning in, right? So what we are going to do first is I am going to go through the prescribed literature through poetry, dramas, and novels, right? So these are the three elements that's included within your paper two on a yearly basis, whether it is mid-year or end-year. For grade 12, of course, there is set work. However, I do want to note, when you look at your exam paper, before we go through the prescribed literature, when you go through your exam paper or when you receive your exam paper to write that final exam or the mock exams, I do suggest you read the questions very, very carefully. I can't stress this enough. It is highly important that you read the questions. They will give you options to choose from. Remember that there is a whole long list of set work. However, at your school, you don't cover everything that's in that set work. Your teacher chooses a drama. Your teacher chooses a novel for you to do. When you go to the exam, you choose what you did in class. I'm definitely going to repeat this again. Please choose what you did in class. There's always some students that choose the set work that they did not do in class because they become confused. So do a practice run with yourself. Get a past paper. You can get it off the website from the Department of Basic Education. Go there, get a past paper, do a practice run, have someone sit with you, have someone time you, so that you can get used to sitting and having to write an exam under pressure. It's extremely vital that I stress this point because we don't want you to lose out on marks that could have been easily obtained if you just chose what you did in class, right? So getting into it, as I mentioned, there is a set of prescribed poetry which we will be going through first. And this set of poems, you will be getting some of them in the final exam. However, you have to go over everything because you need to prepare all of the poems in order for you to answer the questions in the exam, because you can't say that this is it, this is what's coming in the exam, that's what's coming in the exam. Now remember, I understand that it can be quite a daunting task and you can feel under pressure because it's so much work to cover. But if you work out your time, if you plan, if you go over your work slowly, thoroughly, and consistently, then it will be fine. You won't have to worry about anything at all. Okay. So, as we can see, Sonnet 130 of William Shakespeare is in your set work for you to go over. The child was shot dead by soldiers in Nyanga. At a funeral, poem of return. Talk to the peach tree. Pray to mosques this winter coming. Solitude, the morning sun is shining. It is a beauteous evening, calm and free, Fern Hill and the shipwreck. Now, do note that I have mentioned that you have to go over past papers, or it would be beneficial for you to go through past papers. However, with regards to poetry, I will say that because over the past 10 years, it has changed quite a bit. You'll only find some, like for example, Shakespeare, you would always find within your set work, but there's constantly new poems being introduced. So, what I would say is go through your notes with regards to the different types of questions. What type of poem is this? What is the construction of the poem? The meanings behind specific words. What does the specific words refer to? What does the lines and the stanzas in its entirety refer to? Go over questions like that, break it up for yourself. When you see your notes concern something specific, write a question, make a question out of it so that you can get used to it. Okay. And also think about, at times, not only in other forms of literature, but in poetry as well, you will need to understand plots and settings, right? So all of these different terminologies, it's interchangeable within your novels, your dramas as well as in your poetry. Of course, depending on the type of poem that it is, they will also they will also highly likely ask you about the meaning behind the poem, but they will ask you maybe something more holistic as well, in order to gauge whether or not you actually understand the contents of this poem. I know it can be difficult, and I know sometimes when we read poetry, we think this is a whole bunch of like nonsense, because this is not how people speak. Why are we even doing this? But the point is for you to understand language. The point is for you to understand prose. It's for you to understand language usage in different contexts, in different times, referring to different events historically as well. So we can see that there's much more African poetry being introduced into our set work, and that is also for the reason that we as Africans and South Africans need to educate ourselves more on what exactly our history is, and besides our history, what the socio-economic position is of people in certain denominations and areas. So if you understand the meaning behind these things, then you will understand why you are doing it. I know, okay, sometimes it takes a while, but just try, just try your best to enjoy it. Okay. Then next, with regards to the prescribed literature for novels and drama, there is a division between home language as well as first additional language. So remember, as I mentioned, the levels are on different scales, right? So someone that's doing English first additional language is going to do a certain set work based on the level that is required from them to be at in that specific time, right? As a home language student, you of course will have things on a higher level because you are expected to be able to use this as your primary source of communication, as well as also be able to identify with the language in more than just a baseline level. Okay, so as you can see, we have Life of Pi, Dorian Gray, and Cry the Beloved Country, and Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What I am going to say with regards to the novels for English home language as well as first additional language is that we of course don't have enough time to go through every single thing in this work, but I have chosen the more common and the more perceived to be difficult novels and dramas for us to go through today. Then also for home language and first additional language in drama, we have Othello, Crucible, and Hamlet. And then we also have My Children, My Africa, as well as Macbeth. Right? So what I have done is they are commonly used, very commonly used dramas and novels. So Life of Pi has been there for quite a number of years, and there has been revision about that. So for that reason, I am going to focus more on the picture of Dorian Gray for the novels, and then for the dramas, I am going to focus on Hamlet, right? So the Crucible has been done quite a bit. So I don't want to go through a repeat of things that are there, right? Rather with the more difficult. However, I will say if it is that you do require more assistance with regards to any of the set work or language or writing skills, you can contact me after the revision class. I will make my contact details available. Right. So now we are going to start with our novel, which is the picture of Dorian Gray. Now, when we start with the novel, I actually wanted to make clear the themes of a novel. So when we have novels to read, or dramas to read, just books in general, then it is the thoughts that come up. I call it the conflicting thoughts, right? It's like I want to pause and I need to pause, but I don't like reading. I don't want to read this book. But but what I would say is just try your best in that time. You only have a year to do this, right? It's only a year that you're going to do this. After this year, you choose your fate. You choose exactly what it is that you want to do. You might not have to do English after this, but make your best English year if it is your last. And even if it isn't your last, make it your best English year for now. And then after that, you just get better and better and better. You're not going to lose anything by missing out on a few episodes of a series and reading a book instead. You're not going to miss out if you don't go to your friends and just read a book for that time. They will be there. They will still be there. And if they are really your friends and they want you to succeed, then they will say that it's okay and they'll be understanding, right? So what I am going to cover first of all is that you get different portions of analyses within a novel, right? And those include the setting, the context, and the timeline, right? Of the novel in its entirety, and you get it within certain chapters because sometimes the setting changes from one place to another. The timeline can change from one time to another, whether it's years, months, days, or centuries, right? Then we also have the characters that we focus on. We focus on the plot and plot development. Then we focus on themes, we focus on symbols, and we also focus on style. Right? So I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try my best to cover as much as I possibly can in the time that we do have, right? So what I am going to do is I am going to go through each section in an extreme summarized form, if I can say it that way, right? So as I mentioned in the previous class that we do have spoken words. So it's formed in different themes, which would be literal reorganization, inference, and the different questions under these type of question themes, right? So that also applies in literature. It also applies in poetry as well as novels, right? So just remember that it's still important for you to know that for all of your exam papers, right? Now, in summary of the novel, right, the picture of Dorian Gray tells a story of the bargain of one man and with the devil himself, right? So it's between the man and the devil, right? So in exchange for him having youth and beauty eternally, he sacrifices his soul to live a life where he follows just his own pleasure and his own enjoyment. And this is just so that he can put his pleasure and his enjoyment above all else, above everything else in his life, right? That is basically his main goal by this, right? Then there is a contrast with this specific thing, right? So this it's referring to a portrait of himself, right? So he's focusing on his enjoyment and his pleasure, his youth and his beauty, whereas there's this portrait, right, of him. So his portrait becomes ugly and it ages, right? And this reflects the destruction of his soul in making this deal with the devil. And then after 18 years, Dorian, he looks as beautiful as he did when he was 18. So he still has that beauty, and he maintains that beauty when he was like 18 or 20, about 20 roundabout, right? Because they started when he was 18, but then this is when he's 20 now. He looks at himself in the mirror and he sees this like picture of beauty. But when he looks at the portrait of himself, the portrait is extremely ugly and hideous. So this is a contrast between the life and choices of Dorian and his portrait, his picture. And that's why it's also named the picture of Dorian Gray, because the picture is in contrast with him as a person, right? And what he actually did with himself, right? So the type of novel this is, like you can hear, it's very morbid. It's like why? It is described as gothic fiction, right? Because it's very dark, um, and because in this, as I mentioned, he makes a deal with the devil, but it deals with death and horror and romance in between. So usually when you have a horror and you have thrillers and you have death, there's always some sort of romance involved. And if you just think of this like a movie, right? When you have a movie, who are the who are the best people to kill another person that can be regarded as the least and the most suspicious? It would of course be the ones closest to him. So there's always a sense of romance or close relation when it comes to the worst of murders and thrillers, right? So there are quite a few themes in this novel also that they ask you about, and that would be regarding holistically, right, on the book. So it would be as aestheticism and hedonism, right? So they might ask you to comment on it, or they might ask you to state something about this, right? And this wouldn't necessarily be referring to a small portion in the book. It would be referring to the book in general. So Dorian Gray, right? The aestheticism part of this, right, is when he was a student while he was studying at Oxford University. Um, right, he became involved with this aesthetic movement, right? So the aesthetic movement, because he's studying at Oxford University, so you have like modules. So philosophy is one of those modules, and then a branch of philosophy is aesthetics, right? Where you study art and you study beauty, and then aesthetic philosophers, right? They go into what it is that people enjoy looking at. They like to hear, they like to smell or feel and taste. And why they like these things also. So it's not just painting a picture, man. It's appealing to the senses of people. It's studying what appeals to them in order so that your artwork can either provoke them in a way or bring up something within them, right? And then with this, right, they are focusing on enjoying the beauty specifically in the art, rather than like going into the deep meanings. For example, when I look at these pictures of paintings you get, then someone's taking the paintbrush and they just like make a splatter on there, and then you see these people looking at the pictures, and they analyze the pictures, and they will say, this represents this represents that, this represents that. It's not for that. They focus on beauty, right? They focus on a more youthful and sense appealing thing, right? Then hedonism, just quickly, also is a concept that was very, very popular amongst certain people in this time, right? So what hedonism means is to when you pursue your sensual pleasure. So we spoke about the senses now in aestheticism, right? Now we are also speaking about pursuing the sensual pleasure. So they're getting pleasure through their senses. So when they focus on smell and taste and looks, then it appeals to like your pleasuring yourself with regards to your senses, to your smell, to all the different senses that you have, right? So in hedonism and or the hedonistic philosophy specifically, right? The main aim of this philosophy is to satisfy your desires. So your senses and something appealing to your smell and appealing to your taste and appealing to all of these things. This is what the main goal of your what the main goal of you as someone that is in aesthetics or in the aesthetic philosophy. This is your main aim, and that what that is called is hedonism, right? So these are just some of the points about the book, about the novel in general, which also connects to the author, which is Oscar Wilde. So as I mentioned in Wilde, when I mentioned earlier Wilde, I wasn't speaking about Dorian Gray specifically, but the author that wrote about Dorian Gray, right? So the time you're living in connects to what you are writing in that time, right? Your experience relates to what you are writing in a novel, and you as a reader, when you are reading, you have to immerse yourself into the head of the author, into the head and feelings of the characters, right? So when you are doing this, you get an understanding of all of these different elements that influence them when they wrote. So Oscar Wilde lived in this sort of time, right? When he was studying at Oxford, and there was like this branch of philosophy, and it was called aesthetics and so on. And this is what he was also like focusing on at that time because he was involved with him, right? So I am just going to briefly, briefly, just go through the setting context and timeline and the characters so that we can move on to fit everything in. So with regards to the context, the setting, and the timeline, just to paint, this is what paints a picture for us, right? If you are still unsure about what setting is the place where this book or this novel is taking place, right? The area, it can be a country, it can be a region. So when you talk about the set of a movie, right? The set of a movie is that area that paints a picture. It's all the backgrounds. It's all the backgrounds you see in the movie. That is the set. And for the book and for novels, we call it the setting. For dramas as well, call it setting. Right? So it was set in London, in England. This was the late Victorian era in around about the 1800s, late 1800s, 1890. It refers to specifically when Queen Victoria was the monarch. So she was the queen at that time. So this is before Queen Elizabeth, right? This was between her time of reign was between 1837 and 1901, right? So it was written between 1890 and 1899, right? So it was still in the time that she was reigning, right? And it was also published in a magazine called Lippincotts Monthly, right? It was also published at that time, the picture of Dorian Gray, right? So the characterization, right, is also something to be focused on, is what they would ask you about, right? That is the manner in which the author goes into and reveals the personalities of characters within the novel, right? Their thoughts, their feelings, expressions, the actions that they do, the behaviors, and even sometimes when you might not take note of it, but what they're wearing can tell you a lot about them. Some characters are wearing tattered clothing, and some others are much more refined, right? And when you read the novel, once you are reading the novel, right, look for evidences, right, that shows you and points you to the characters' personalities and their emotions, right? And focus on these main things and highlight it and make notes of it. Make note of the types of things that they wear, because your clothes and your dress shows a lot about you as well. How you feel that day, maybe, or just in general, how you are as a person. Then the characters, right? I'll just go to the main character, which is Dorian Gray, right? Who is the main character of this novel. And many list him. There's like not necessarily one banner for him, but he falls under antagonist as well as protagonist, right? And he, of course, he focuses more on things that are beautiful, because of the reason that he lacks intellectual depth, right? So there's a sort of vanity that comes out within his character, right? And he is very, because of this, right, he's also destructive and narcissistic, right? And he, of course, has influences which we won't go into right now. There are influences on him, and there are different uh, reasons for him becoming like this because of that influence as well, but which we won't necessarily go into now. Now, what I am going to mention just before we end off, because we can't focus on every single thing in the novel, is that the novel begins, right, when he Dorian is approximately 20 years old. So we're going to go through the plot development, right, just in summary. So when he's 20 years old and he has his friend Basil. So Basil Hallward paints a perfect portrait of him, right? Remember, they are in the art field, right? So his friend paints this portrait of him that is just perfect, right? And at the same time, Dorian is also meeting Lord Henry, and this is now when he's at Basil's studio. So even though Basil doesn't actually want to introduce them, he knows Lord Henry is there, but he doesn't want to introduce Dorian and Henry with each other. But Dorian, he chooses to allow Lord Henry to influence him, right? So he influences him to follow this life of pleasure and sin. And it is this is one of the reasons also that, like, Basil wasn't keen on introducing the two of them, because he had insight into the fact that they might have an effect on each other, or Lord Henry might have an effect on Dorian, and which is what exactly what happened. So in summary, right, from chapter 1 to chapter 10, right, this speaks about the early time in Dorian's pursuit, right? So he's pursuing pleasure and self-indulgence, right? So chapter 1 to 10 deals with that. But from chapter 11, right, that takes place 18 years later. So this is after his active pursuit of pleasure and self-indulgence, right? This is after that pursuit. Now they're giving you a picture of what happened afterwards, right? So as you can hear, there is like quite a bit to go through with regards to this, right? There are different themes that we can extract from that, the beauty and youth also, negative influences, art and life, then also appearance versus reality, right? When we compare the picture and what the reality of it is of Dorian Gray's life, right? So that versus each other. You also get outer beauty, but when you follow your desires and your pleasures, uh, when you follow your desires and your pleasures solely, then what happens is you deprive yourself from certain things spiritually and things that contribute to your soul. And that is why they say when you indulge yourself too much in vanity and art and just pleasure, then you deprive your soul of what it needs, right? So all of these different things is what is covered in this and as I mentioned, you can of course contact me if you would like more information regarding this novel. However, we do have to continue just for the sake of this revision session. We want to cover as much as possible. So we are going to do it in a sort of summarized manner, as I mentioned, right? So we're going to move on now to drama, which is Hamlet. Okay, so I know that this is a bit challenging for some because Hamlet is Shakespeare, and many do not enjoy Shakespeare. I will be honest, I relate a lot. When I was in your shoes, but um, I wouldn't say it grew on me, but I would say that you it gives you insight into a different time, and it gives you insight into the different ways that people live, the different ways that people think also. If we look at the Shakespearean era, we look at that entire time, then we will see that there are great differences in the the times that they lived in, the way it was set, the way they communicated, and it's simple things like when they speak to each other, they speak to each other by saying like odd words. But when you hear the word usage, that is what you can appreciate from this level of writing, right? You appreciate the vocabulary that is used because at that we are in a degeneration of language, right? So it's almost as if proper language usage is going out the door because we are confining ourselves to the new era of using not necessarily the correct words, but made up words sometimes to make it easier for people, right? But anyways, that's not what we're going to focus on now. We are going to focus specifically on more on Hamlet, but also I'm going to try to merge the writing skills that we need in the specific section of English, which is paper 2, right? So just when we write essays, which will often come in our exams, it will focus on the question, will focus on the themes, the characters, the plot, and the style, right? They will either want you to write about all of those things, which highly unlikely. It can be quite extensive, but they will want you to focus maybe on one, all right? So you need to focus on what exactly they are asking you. Is it a theme, character, plot, style, or is it more than one character also? So you write down the key instruction words. So are they saying discuss? Are they saying explain? Are they saying analyze in the question, right? So when you write this essay, right, what you do is you write the topic statement for your essay within the introduction, right? You have to write the topic statement. So you sort of introduce it, give an overview, a background, depending on if it's about the character, the theme, the plot, etc. You just give us a very simplified background, but make sure that within that background you write your topic statement for the essay. So you use the question words. You say, I will be explaining the style, or I'll be explaining the theme of this drama within this section. Sometimes they ask you for the theme in a section. Sometimes they ask you about the theme of the entire drama. Be specific. Use the question to your advantage and just rearrange it to write the topic, right? Within your introduction. Then when it comes to body, right? You can use the peel method of writing, right? So when you write your body, you write it in different paragraphs. So you write the point, the explanation, the evidence, and then you write the link to the next point, right? So when you start, you make a point, okay? You make a point, then you just state it. It's like you're making a statement, right? Then you explain what is meant by the statement, right? Your evidence will be because this what happened, this is what this is what happened, or this is what was said in this section of the book, right? You don't need to, you can, if you would like, you can write line, I don't know, line 5, page 6 of the drama, but I mean, that's a bit overkill. So what you can do is just, you can either write quotes from the book, or you can phrase it in a way it's not a quote. It's not a quote, right? But you're writing a phrase about what happened in that way. Then the link is very important, because what you're writing now, it needs to connect to the next thing. So just write a connecting sentence at the end of your paragraph. When it comes to your last paragraph, right? You don't necessarily need to do the link, right? But your last sentence in your last paragraph must lead to the fact that you will be concluding now, right? It needs to lead to that. So that's how you do it, okay? And of course, we can go through exactly how to write an essay in detail. We can practice how to write an essay in detail, maybe after the session, right? So when we do this, specifically the drama, right? We will realize that the drama is, as I mentioned, in like a very, very old setting. So just to give a brief overview of this drama, right? Um, it was written, Hamlet was written even before the setting of Dorian Gray, right? The timeline is way early. It was in the 1500s, right? In approximately 1599 and 1601, right? So this is like math. This is based on a revenge story, right? It's a Danish revenge story. It was recorded. This was recorded, right, by Saxo Grammaticus in the 1100s, right, at that time. So because it's a Danish story, it took place in Denmark, and it was in the Elizabethan era, right? So remember the Dorian Gray was Victorian. This is now Elizabethan, right? So most of the play takes place in the royal palace, right? Majority of it takes place in the royal palace, okay? It is a revenge tragedy, right? The protagonist is Hamlet, right? There is major conflict between Hamlet, where he feels a responsibility to avenge his father's murder, right? And thus, his reason for revenge, for avenging and taking revenge on his uncle Claudius, right, is because of his father's murder. But Claudius is now the king, right? And this, of course, it makes things more complicated for Hamlet since he is the prince. But he also, like, we do know that the ghost is involved, right? And Hamlet has doubts on whether he can trust the ghost and whether killing Claudius is the appropriate thing to do, right? So he wants to avenge the murder of his father, but he also has conflicting thoughts. He's unsure about what to do. So there is a climax when Hamlet stabs Polonius through the arrows, and this is so because this is a drama, right? It's not in chapters, it's in acts, right? So in Act 3, this is when he stabs him, and it's in scene 4. So Act 3, scene 4 is where the climax occurred, and this is an important uh, part to remember, right? Because climax is something that they always ask about and they enjoy asking about it, right? So he brings himself, by this, he brings himself into a conflict with the king, which is Claudius, right? And it's, of course, unavoidable. But there is also another climax that takes place in Act 4, in the next act, scene 4, right? So just remember Act 3, scene 4, Act 4, scene 4. So both is scene 4, Act 3, and Act 4, right? So this climax happens, right, when he resolves now to fully commit himself to revenge in a violent manner, right? So this is the two climax, and that's also some of the important points. And I mentioned the setting, which is the place, and the time, also in the 1500s, right? So there are quite a number of elements that can be covered in drama in general, and specifically in the drama of Hamlet. There's a lot of things to understand because it's very different to ours, and it includes the chain of being, right? It's The chain of being refers to specifically the the levels of hierarchy in belief, if I have to mention it that way, right? So it's regarding the you get humanity and animals. Obviously, we would consider that animals are below us in the chain because of their intellect or lack of intellect, right? So what we have is elements, right? Elements, the air, the earth, and so on, that gets feeded on. Animals feed on those elements. We feed on elements and animals. And then we have angels that are above us and the deities which are above them, right? And of course, this is not only specific to Islam. More it is more comprehensive of just religion in its entirety, right? So it's not about Islam or Christianity per se. It's just to understand the hierarchy within deities and beings. So I will have to end off on that note. There is quite a lot to go through with regards to this specifically, but I will say if there are any additional questions, if there are concerns, if you want notes, if you want practice runs, you can contact me via email, or you can also get into contact with me via Instagram, or you can contact the radio and just ask them for contact details.
Wonderful. Shukran so much, Muslima, for a very informative session today. You've definitely taken me back to my grade 12 years, which was many moons ago. But shukran once again for an informative session. And if anyone would like to make contact with Muslima, we will gladly share that details with you. You can call our reception desk, and the number is 021 44235. Apologies, 00. But also to remind you that the Matric online revision session, which we are conducting, is proudly sponsored by the Two Oceans Graduate Institute. And if you are not familiar with the Two Oceans Graduate Institute, you can hop onto their website. They are an accredited they are an accredited online education provider where you can study to become a teacher, be it high school or primary school teacher, in the comfort and privacy of your own home. For more information, you can check out the website, and that website details is www.togi.ac.za, or call the Two Oceans Graduate Institute on 021 Well, that is a wrap from myself and our guest Muslima Ismail, or rather Muslima Ismail Ali. Yeah, we'll look forward to having you back. And I think the next session will be on Arabic, inshallah. So shukran once again. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum